So this was a 40K conversation in the comments, and then we took it offline for a little bit. It's interesting with the life cycle of each edition of Warhammer 40,000. And if you've had the chance to play one or two of the previous editions, you kind of have a foundation for this. If you're new to 40K with this edition, whether it's a couple of weeks in, a month in, or you've been playing since day one of the current edition, this is just a natural ebb and flow of how Games Workshop kind of works, where we start to reach a critical mass with our tactics, and then something has to reset. Usually it's a new edition to correct it on there. I'm not saying we'll get a new edition anytime soon. I think once we get a secondary drop with the Space Marine Codex, then we're getting closer to a new edition on there. I won't say you'll get a dedicated Primaris Dex soon. I think that will be for the next edition of 40K, maybe if they advance the timeline a little bit. On a side note, we already need new adventurers for Blackstone Fortress. I mean, I'm sure that'll be coming at some point. And in Games Workshop logic, paying $10 a fig, you'll get 4 figures for like $50, which means 40 street. That's a great deal. $10 for a piece of plastic. But I'm sure we will get a Space Marine in the Blackstone Fortress. And will that be a little bit overpowered? Some people have said it would be nice to like play 40K without Space Marines. I wouldn't mind, honestly, like a Primaris Marine or kind of a generic type Marine. I don't want a Tech Marine or like a Chaplain or some sort of Chapter Master hero. Just kind of like, a Marine got sent to the Blackstone Fortress, maybe Death Watch or something in there. I wouldn't mind that diversity. I also really want an Orc, just so when we play with the friends, I can talk like an Orc. And I really want a Necron Lord. An Orc, I don't know how you'd tie that in, because an Orc can't show that restraint on there. But a Necron Lord, I think it could. Overlord would be too high. Necron Lord, and, look, it fits in the narrative because Necrons get along with Blood Angels, and it's fine on there. But looking at 40K right now, trying to get me back on track, the idea was wounds, multi-wound models, where when Games Workshop shifted everything over to basically more and more wounds, this is, backtrack it even further for a minute, for the foundation for those of you who are not in 40K, previous editions. A new edition of Warhammer 40,000 comes out, and the rules get locked in for it. And there are certain swings in the rules because rather than fix the rules, Games Workshop just overly corrects things on there. And that works for a very, very short time. But as we get codex creep, as things kind of move on with updates, things reach to this level. They reach to this point where they can no longer be sustained. And certain units across the multiple armies in there now lose functionality or are just not worth the points, even if you're a narrative player. And this is not the first time Games Workshop has done this. I'm going to back up a little bit further for some context. In 4th edition of Warhammer 40,000, you had scoring objectives, points on the table, missions, and parameters. Every single unit was scoring or could score. So what you would do is you'd pay what's called the troop tax. You would take 2 very, very small minimal troop choices, which were often the worst in your army faction. And then the rest of your points you would just spend on super killy stuff out there. So you saw these armies that, if Space Marines reflected where the bulk of a Space Marine chapter was indeed tacticals and maybe a Devastator squad and maybe an Assault squad and a couple of and maybe some scouts. What you really saw on the table was 2 small scout units or 2 stripped down small tac squads, and the rest were Terminators and Land Raiders and Vindicators and heavy hitting stuff on there. So Games Workshop realized they weren't selling any troop kits, especially since they were big. So what they did for 5th edition was now change it. Only troops could score. That's it. Your elites, they could kill stuff. Your heavy support could kill stuff. Your HQ at the time could kill stuff. But they don't mean anything for mission scoring. You could contest with them, but you could not hold. So now, not only does everybody have to now reboot their army, because you got to go out and buy new troop choices, it was a correction. But rather than correcting the fundamental flaws of the game, they just swung in that direction. So over time, as Codex is built out, if you had an army that could throw down really cheap but effective troop choices, you auto-win. 2 examples of it. Tyranids, Gene Stealers. Now this is at the time. We're talking 5th edition. Gene Stealers were amazing shock troops. They were beast in the assault. They were reasonably priced, but the challenge was they were a troop choice. So if I spent the points for Gene Stealers to make them super killy, and they worked because you could infiltrate, you could do different things. I have my elite shock troops that happen to be troop choices in the Codex because Games Workshop doesn't update things. I push them forward to go and kill you. I kill you. You kill me. I self-destruct on you, but I caused a lot of damage. I have no troop choices left. If I take them to hang back, well, then they're not being utilized for what they are. Compare that to Imperial Guard, where, and I never understood this, and I still don't understand this on there. A melt-a-gun, well, a plasma gun. A plasma gun in a Space Marine chapter. How many plasma guns are there in a Space Marine chapter, including the armory? Leave relics out of it. Average plasma guns, plasma cannons. 20? 50? On the tabletop, maybe you'd see 1 in a tac squad or 1 in every other tac squad. Even if you're a Dark Angel players and you love plasma. That's the narrative. Now, in the Imperial Guard, everyone's got a flashlight on there. Maybe they've got a flamer, maybe they've got a plasma gun, maybe they've got a melt-a-gun. The troop choices in 5th edition for Imperial Guard were such that I could take veterans that were troops, I could give them all plasma, I can give them all melta, so just empty out the entire Forge World and dump it in my army, and I got a free Chimera that, since it was a troop choice, it was also dedicated scoring. It was skewed on there. It was absolutely skewed on there. And we see this on and on through the editions. So as we moved into later editions, Fritz, let's get to 8th edition here. Let's get to the crux of this. You saw vehicles were very, very powerful. You saw that in previous editions of 40K, where you had this, when they had hull, where they had not wounds, but crew effects. So I could shoot at your vehicles and not blow it up, but stun it, stun it, stun it, stun it, shake it, stun it, and then you have machine spirit or stones and you're fine next turn. And you're like, wait a second, I just shot my entire army into that tank, didn't blow it up, nothing happened, and you ignored it. So it made vehicles a little bit overpowered, and it made vehicle armies that could throw down vehicles cheaply, like Imperial Guard, mad powerful. And Wave Serpents, before they got the energy shield back in the day, you're like, I just can't compete, because paying like 120 points for a Wave Serpent is bonkers on there. So Games Workshop then said, well, you know what, we'll introduce hull points. So now, whenever you score a damage effect on it, you strip away a hull point. That was a correction in the right direction. But through Codex creep and through other things, it's still, because you had to beat the armor value on it, it still was easier said than done to strip hull points. So now we get to 8th edition, and the idea to Sigmarize and speed up the game. The changes we see are, now a game of 40K, of course, there is no right or wrong size to play. But generally speaking, the more models you throw down, the bigger the game's going to be. And look, I want big games. I love big games. I love mega games, apocalypse games, all that type of stuff. We want that, right? But with all the bookkeeping in 7th, and okay, we're going to play the game of 40K. Okay, roll for Warlord traits. Roll for this. Roll for relic effects. Roll for, all this bookkeeping. I don't remember half of it. It's just insane. And the game was dragging out, and the game was taking forever. Not to mention everything more or less moved at the same rate. So they certainly did learn a lot from Age of Sigmar and introduced things into the game, different rates of moving. some changes into the assault, changes with the bookkeeping. I have to say 40K does play much faster on there. One of the ways they tried to speed up the game was this conversion to everything into wounds. So now, in theory, the way you do that, because it is a D6 based system, if I want to make something tougher, I just jack up the wounds on there. I mean, across the board, that's the easiest way to justify it out. Because at the beginning of 8th edition, when things were locked, you could say, for the most part, the wound output, high strength, high volume wounds, is somewhat capped by each army. So in theory, it'll take 2 or 3 turns to chew through heavy armor or heavy multi-wound stuff. So it's about what it's supposed to be. But remember codex creep. Games Workshop is selling models, and I want them to continue selling models, and I want more Blackstone Fortress. I want an updated Khorne Berserker kit. I want some updated Eldar stuff out there. I'm glad that they're pushing more out. But what has really distinguished 8th edition from previous editions is now everything is in. There's such a diversity of models. The turnover rate of new stuff being introduced in terms of box sets and tie-in stuff. I mean, I could pull my Blackstone Fortress stuff into regular 40K. I'll do it for the lulls, but there's some other stuff out there that is very potent. Forge World has been legit and auto-include for a long time. It's not like back in the day where it was experimental and you had to get your opponent's permission to do it. Now it is mainstream on there. You know, now we've got, this was the other previous edition, but we've got the Baby Titans introduced. The wound output has been accelerated and creeping much, much faster in 8th. So now a lot of the stuff is out of whack. So now, in my opinion, and this is true, I'm starting to see it a little bit, and it is starting to trickle down into my lists and stuff. I just need wound fodder. If at the end of the day, if you can put out so many high volume, high strength shots for the points, it's cheaper for me to have lots and lots of cultists than, say, a Land Raider on there. It's just, and it's safer too, because if you just go overkill and explode and blow up my Land Raider, it's almost to the point you can kill a Land Raider as easy as you can for a group of cultists, and you can only shoot really kind of 1-to-1 on there. I'd rather play it. Now, look, I'm always going to play a Land Raider. I mean, that's that narrative. But if I'm looking into that competitive mindset, yeah, I agree with what these fellow 40K players were saying. I agree with that perspective on there. It's so easy to throw it down wounds. I just want cheap trash mob wound counters. Is that what you want 40K to turn into? Essentially playing Epic on a heroic scale? Epic 40K on heroic scale? Games Workshop overcompensates. They push forward. Now it's swung the other way. And it's going to take a new edition to correct that, because you are not going to be pulling back. Thoughts? Comments? Observations from your local meta on that?